But our biggest project that we're launching now is out at the Hotchkiss Field and Community Center in the north side. This is a park that's operated by Parks and Recreation. And in the back side of that park, we are putting in a walking trail, trees, native plants as well to try and help create a more accessible options for the community there to engage with that park outside of just for athletics. Athletics will remain a really big part of it. There's some wonderful resources out of that park, and so we don't want to take away from that, but to really give options for folks who might be using other trails in the neighborhood who live up next to that park and can actually get access in now, whether it's on a stroller, running, walking, access for shade, engaging play spaces for kids. So that's the hope anyway. We hope to break ground in 2024. We are in our fundraising phase right now.
ESPN Richmond 106.1 and Choice 105.3. Welcome to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. I am your host, Will Melton, and today we have Lisa Trapp from Captial Trees. We're going to talk about the lovely environment that we have here in Greater Richmond and all the work that Captial Trees is doing to make it even more beautiful. But before we get started, if you're joining this program for the first time, please check out americashealthiestcity.com and check out the ideas board that we have there. We invite everybody in the community to leave their ideas behind and comments on the ideas that have been left. And if you represent a nonprofit, a for-profit, an academic institution, or a government agency, and you want to help us in this 10-year community partnership to make RVA the entire region the healthiest in America by 2033, check out what it takes to become an ambassador. It is free. It will help tell your story, and it'll allow us to get to the destination because it takes all of us working together to do it. So without further ado, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So we start every show with the background of our guest, and we want to know, are you native to Richmond, or did you come here? And if you did come here, what brought you to this community?
Yeah, I was actually raised military, so I moved to Virginia my sophomore year of high school. And then after graduating from high school, I went on to Virginia Tech. And after graduating from Tech, I landed here in Richmond. So I've been here for a little over 10 years now. So I definitely consider it my home now, but definitely not born and bred, kind of from all over.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated by your background because you've been working in sort of wildlife and natural sciences from study to your entire career. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your time at Tech and what you studied and kind of how that led you to the next thing, and we'll talk about your job now.
Sure. So I have pretty much loved working with animals since I was a little kid. When I was really young, I wanted to kind of do rehab work and that kind of thing, and that's how I found Virginia Tech and their wildlife science program. That was absolutely wonderful. 4 years, did a lot of work with Fish and Wildlife Service, local rehabbers, my own research project in undergrad, which kind of gave me a lot of exposure to a lot of different ways you can take the field. After graduating, like I said, I moved down to Richmond where I kind of fell into animal care for a bit. And then I managed a nature center for quite a few years with Chesterfield County Parks and Recreation. Loved that job. But after working there for a little while, I kind of found that, it's hard to complain when you're working out in the woods all day. It's a beautiful space to be. But with the pandemic and spending more time at home, I live in the city. And I really felt like there was more we could be doing to kind of create connective habitats. And so I really started looking around and seeing what organizations were putting in wild spaces and habitats and gardens around the area. And that's how I found Captial Trees, which is where I'm at now. And really their holistic approach to kind of creating gardens that are for people. They have an environmental focus, they have an environmental reach, but also, they're really trying to do best practices around habitat development and really kind of creating connective spaces. And so that's how I really found where I'm at now.
So I have a tremendous amount of respect for anybody who works in wildlife. My wife did conservation science as part of her first master's at the Center for Conservation Biology in Williamsburg. And there's a lot of lonely days out there in the field. So tremendous amount of respect for that. And Chesterfield County, I have to give them a plug. CFIT Chesterfield is an ambassador to this program. They are our first municipal partner, so we're excited to have them. So glad to know that you spent time there. So you did that for, 5 years, 4 years?
Yeah, officially full-time for 4 years, but, graduated during the recession, so worked quite a few jobs for a little bit there until I found my feet.
Great. Well, I understand that as well. So let's talk about Capitol Trees. You are now the program and outreach manager for Capitol Trees. Can you tell us a little bit about what that role entails and, maybe from the time you started, where you started and how you got to be where you're at now?
So the job entails quite a bit of stuff, I guess, a lot to do. But a lot of what I focus on primarily is the volunteer and programming side. My position I will have been in my position for, I guess, almost 3 years now, coming up in this December. And so really when I started, there was a real need for volunteer engagement within our spaces. Capitol Trees was created by volunteers, it was founded by volunteers, and so they'll always be a big part of what we do, but having an organized plan for that was something that really was needed. Along the low line, for those who have not been to the low line, which runs along the Capitol Trail, it's all city property, but we agree to maintain it. So after installing these gardens, we are continuing to maintain it as sustainably as possible. So no systemic herbicide, no systemic pesticides, a lot of boots on the ground and hands on the dirt, really kind of getting in there and pulling out weeds and pruning plants, which is a lot of time and effort. And so having a dedicated group of folks who can be down there and spending time in these gardens and keeping them maintained was a real need. I mean, it's a little over 5.5 acres of garden space, which is a lot. And so that became a very big focus and priority for me as far as making sure we had people who wanted to engage and spend time down there. But then also making sure we're spreading the word about Capitol Trees and the work that we're doing too. Trying to boost educational opportunities where we can. We have a blog on our sustainable maintenance practices that's up on our website. So that's largely new, as I think about a year ago now. Increasing our social media awareness and things like that, just to kind of really boost what we're doing and how to get us out there in the community.
Great. So I understand that in addition to your paid role, you're also working in the space as a volunteer as well, digging weeds and doing all that.
Yeah, I mean, I get down there when I can, but for the most part, we're very fortunate to have our horticultural consultant who works with us, Mary Petrus. She really helps guide what we need to do within the garden side of things. So when I can get down there and pull some weeds, I definitely do. But that can fluctuate from season to season. Fall and spring is a really busy time for a lot of planting. And then we kind of have a little bit of a slowdown coming in the summer and a little bit in the winter. But there's weeds to pull all year long. So for sure.
Well, my team at Exponent 21 has volunteered with Shalom Farms and done some planting, and I find that type of activity is just cathartic and just really a wonderful thing for mental health. So I don't know if you find the same thing to be true.
Oh, absolutely. Pulling weeds, you can kind of get into like a Zen state of being. It can feel very repetitive if that's not your thing, but we have folks who really love just getting down there and they'll pick every little weed you can possibly see. Just engaging with nature, watching the wind blow through plants, getting your hands physically in the dirt is incredibly important. I think we often forget that we come from nature, right? We're not separate. And so having these options to, sit under a tree in some shade or plant a plant in the ground or watch something go from a seed all the way up to a mature plant that you're then dividing a couple years later, especially in a community space. I mean, it has tremendous value. I think coming from a wildlife background, one of the things that I noticed is just how much we've seen our wildlife increase in that space over the last couple of years, especially as we've been prioritizing the use of native plants. And so I enjoy birding. And so being able to go down there and see, a phoebe, which I haven't seen in a couple of years, or we got our first goldfinches 2 years ago, was really exciting, especially in a space like that. We also have done some work with a professor on pollinators. And so being able to really look at what pollinators are using these gardens. These are moments that a family walking along can have with their kids. They can hear bird songs, not just trains. They can engage with insects that are using that space, not just flowers. And because they're native, they go through a full cycle. So we're seeing, leaves changing color, dormancy happening. And those are important processes to go through and to visualize, especially for kids, especially in these urban spaces where often we pull plants out when they're dying and put them back in. And so from, the physical aspect of being able to use a space, whether it's weeding or walking through it, but then also the mental health aspect of engaging with nature is incredibly valuable too.
So I think that the Lone Line is likely probably one of the best known projects that you guys have, but you have more than that. I want to take a moment to talk about that, but first, Thank you for listening to America's Healthiest City on Mike King Biz Radio Network. Today we are talking to Lisa Trapp, the Program and Outreach Manager for Captial Trees. Wonderful things that you guys are doing here in the community, and I know you've got projects that span the region, and you're working on something new. So I want to give you a chance to just talk about some of the projects that people might be less familiar with than the Low Line, which has been just such a gift since I've lived in Richmond. So
sure, absolutely. So most recently, just last month, actually, we partnered with Keep Virginia Beautiful, CoStar, and City of Richmond Parks and Recreation to do 50 trees out at Canoe Run. So we have put in 50 new trees out at that space. But our biggest project that we're launching now is out at the Hotchkiss Field and Community Center in the north side. This is a park that's operated by Parks and Recreation. And in the back side of that park, we are putting in a walking trail, trees, native plants as well, to try and help create a more accessible options for the community there to engage with that park outside of just for athletics. Athletics will remain a really big part of it. There's some wonderful resources out of that park, and so we don't want to take away from that, but to really give options for folks who might be using other trails in the neighborhood who live up next to that park and can actually get access in now, whether it's on a stroller, running, walking, access for shade, engaging play spaces for kids. So that's the hope anyway. We hope to break ground in 2024. We are in our fundraising phase right now.
Great. Well, I used to live in that neighborhood, so drove by that park all the time, and love seeing the skate rink they've got over there now.
Amazing, yeah.
And it's a great place, and I can certainly would have appreciated the project being done before I moved. But so let's talk a little bit about how you guys raise money, because that is so important. Where do you guys get funding, and tell us a little bit about the fundraising process that you're in right now for Hotchkiss.
Sure, yeah, I will do my best with that. Right now, we do raise money through, grants, foundations, that kind of thing. A lot of individual donations. Historically, I think 60% of our fundraising has come from individual donors. So really people investing in these spaces and wanting these spaces in their community is a big part of where we raise funds from. And every little bit makes a difference. We won't break ground on a project till we raise 80% or more. So we want to be sure we can see it through to completion. And so really making sure we have that baseline in place to follow through on the project and get it done is a big part of where we come from. Right now, as far as donations are concerned, you can always send in checks or money. You can make donations through our website. And every little bit counts. So that's the biggest way right now.
Now, do you guys get any municipal funding, or is it all through grants and philanthropy?
To be honest with you, I don't dig that deep into the budgeting side, so I would say probably yes, but that would be a better question for our executive director. Cool.
Well, why don't you give you a chance to talk about your executive director, since you can be here today. Yeah. Shelley Barkin has been in that role. So tell us a little bit about her and what her leadership is like.
Yeah, so Shelley Barrett-Parsons, our executive director, has been in the position since May of 2021, so she's coming up on her third year now too. She's our first full-time executive director for Captial Trees, and really we've just done a lot of internal growth, did a strategic plan. Now we're kind of really hoping to launch this new project and get things moving.
So tell me a little bit about the partnerships that you guys rely on to do the work that you do.
Yeah, so we do a lot with public-private agreements, right? So one of our biggest things is that we don't own the land that we develop on. It allows us to stay kind of nimble. So really finding public spaces that are looking for public landscapes, gardening options that have historically not maybe had access to green spaces or tree canopy previously. So a lot of our work is done in city property specifically. So we partner a lot with City of Richmond Parks and Recreation, especially because they're now looking at a lot of these spaces that might need more gardening areas or additional tree canopy as well.
Now, you mentioned CoStar earlier, and they're actually referred to us as potential guests in the future because of what they are doing in the city. Tell us a little bit about how you work with corporations and private entities.
Yeah, CoStar was an exciting one for us. They actually came to us with Keep Virginia Beautiful, so we were able to kind of do a larger partnership with another nonprofit and a business. So that was a really exciting kind of venture. But typically, for folks who want to kind of partner with us or join us, do work days or volunteer days or something like that, really they kind of just reach out to me, and then we can try to set something up. large or for smaller groups, so folks who are looking for teams of about 10 to 20, we love having volunteer days down in the gardens for corporations and businesses. If they want to engage from like the small side of things, we often always have work to do. As we launch and have more projects, my hope is that we can increase those opportunities for folks who have larger teams. The Keep Virginia Beautiful tree planting with CoStar, that was quite a big one. That was 50 trees with 50 people. And then we were also able to open that up to the public as part of RVA Arbor Week as well. So ended up being a ton of folks out there planting trees, which is wonderful. And we're hoping to increase our bandwidth for projects like that as well in the future. So I think, right now, we're pretty small scale. We're pretty, so really if you want to engage, it's largely contacting myself or Shelly or someone within the organization, just because it's going to be routed that way anyway. For larger groups, it kind of depends on how we have opportunities pop up.
Cool. Well, you were referred to me by Ann Porch from Basket and Bike. No doubt the low line has been a big impact on her work as she guides tours through that area. I imagine that both measured and your perception, there's a great impact on the work that you guys are doing in the community. Can you tell me a little bit about your perception of that impact and what sorts of things maybe people might benefit from as you move through all these projects that you guys are pursuing?
Sure. Well, I think we talked a little bit about the physical and mental health side of everything. The low line has been around I think it was finished in 2016 officially. The green, which a lot of people, I don't know if they often see that it's there, notice it's there. It's tucked back behind the flood wall that connects the canal walk. That was completed in 2020. So, and then we also have Great Ship Walk from a connective space that was done in 2013. Being able to kind of see almost a decade from that first project, and we'll be getting more and more there through the low line. I think the pandemic specifically really showed a very clear need for these green spaces. When people can't necessarily gather in homes, they're welcoming gathering and safe gathering spaces for social engagement. But they also are opportunities for people to walk together, to look at new things together, or alone, and get moving. And I think from just being out in the gardens just about every week and seeing either new people, whether it's people visiting Richmond, or people who've been engaging in that space for years and are walking further than they walked before, or are riding further than they've ridden before. And it's an opportunity to either slow down and get to know somebody, or it's an opportunity to just kind of engage with something new as you're moving along and running and biking or rollerblading, or whatever it may be along the Capitol Trail is a great example. And I think as we kind of hopefully have more and more of these spaces pop up, not only is it creating opportunities for easier transit around the city. You can maybe bike across the city when you couldn't have before, and in shaded areas, so you're not going through intense heat in order to get from point A to point B. If I would love to see that kind of come about throughout more of the city, really. So you could say, hey, I'm going to go visit this other part of the city, or I need to get to work on the other part of the city. And now I can bike or walk there safely and not have to be in 100-degree temperatures if it's in the middle of the summer, or maybe don't have a windbreak anywhere if it's in the winter. And so these spaces are also really important from a getting from where you need to be perspective. And so I think, the environmental piece is something I always think about first because that's my background. But the value from human health perspective, physically, human access to nature, and really cooling in the summer, carbon sequestration. I mean, the benefits of these spaces is innumerable, I think.
Yeah. Well, as we have about $10 billion in the development pipeline in the region, it's evident that lots of people are moving here. And, I can only imagine that those numbers would be much lower had the low line not been done and some of these other green spaces. So
I think we forget that, when you go visit somewhere, we often go to parks, and we go, if you go to New York, you want to go to Central Park. If you want to visit botanical gardens, you want to go to famous trees. I mean, these are landmarks and things that people, when you visit somewhere, you often forget those are things that exist right here in your own city. And we have wonderful, wonderful parks and green spaces here.
Well, there's so much intentionality that's required to get there. And I can just think about, going from the furthest east on the river in the city to, probably not the furthest west, but, along the river, there's just so much to do. I mean, you've got the parks, but then you move into the canal walk and you've got the murals and you've got the canal, but then you can move over and, cross the river. And it's, I have probably spent more time on the Capitol Trail walking than I have any other place in the city since I've been here from an outdoor space perspective, because it never, it always delivers something new too, because the landscape's always changing.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to talk about ideas for the future, and just kind of maybe ideate a little bit around things that we could do. We do have our ideas board. Before we do, just quickly, you're listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. This show airs every Thursday at 6 a.m. Here on the station, and today we have Lisa Trapp, the program and outreach manager from Capitol Trees. We're talking about the lovely green space we have here in the city, and we're talking about ways that we can go further. So I'll give you a chance maybe to inject. We'll put this on our ideas board, but one or two ideas that you think maybe big or small that individuals or groups could pursue in order to move the needle in the direction toward being the healthiest, if we can get there.
Yeah. Well, I think I guess there's so many good answers. Let me think.
We've got time, so you can give me a few different ideas.
Yeah, I think, so from the, environmental side of things, whether it's if you don't have access to a yard, but you have a patio, putting in a pot with some native plants in it and creating more connected spaces for things like insects and birds to move along and find those larger green spaces. I think that's always one that's great. And it enhances joy just outside of your own home, right? Whether it's on a balcony or on a porch, or if you are lucky enough to have a yard. Caring for, our street trees, they're community assets. Our green spaces are community assets, and they take a lot of long-term maintenance. I think one of the things that we often get excited about is that joy of putting in a new tree or putting in a new plant. But that tree and those plants need care every single year and all year long. And so really remembering that it's not just a set it and forget it system. You need to put in the care long-term for it, and showing up and engaging and helping pull weeds, or finding a different spot, whether it's a lot or a park space that's been historically lawn, or any little corner that could be a pocket park or a new little green space that, a median or something like that could be something else, and making more and increased accessible green spaces. Putting in trees, we don't want to just remove our trees. They're a connective system, and the more they can connect, the stronger they'll be. And so we really want we want a lot of trees, and we want them to be strong trees. And so making sure that we're kind of creating this space that you can have consistent shade throughout, while also being mindful of the different ecosystems that we live in. And so I think there's a lot of different things that we could keep doing. We've lost quite a few trees with, invasive species and things like that. And so really trying to think through how we're putting in trees, what trees are putting in, what plants are putting in. Native plants are a big one for me, but being mindful of which native plants are going to do the best for the longest value, and also be the best for the insects that we want to provide for. But how are they surviving in these spaces as well? Because you don't want to put in a tree and then lose it every single year because it's unhappy. And so making sure that we're putting in these long-term pieces, long-term management tactics, to really make sure that they're thriving long-term, right? So because we really want to say that the gardens that we're putting in today are still going to be there 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. And so I think for me, that's the biggest one, is just how do we make sure that this is realistic and maintainable and consistent. And I think a lot of that takes everyone kind of helping out and lending a hand to keep it a green city too.
So I had the opportunity to visit Kansas City with a delegation from Richmond in May this year, and I was in a breakout session, panel discussion, and one of the community experts from Kansas City asked the audience a question, and she said, I heard from somebody that you guys don't have any trees in Richmond. And it was funny because it was not an accurate statement, but
Mhm.
we were able to educate her that
Yeah.
we have places in Richmond that don't have a canopy, that they are largely redline neighborhoods, and that's a whole subject that we can get into. But you've mentioned shade probably 3 different times during this interview, and I don't know that I've done enough to acknowledge the importance of that and the work that we need to do to bring shade to the rest of the community. Tell me a little bit about your ideas on that front, and what do we need to do? I mean, you guys have obviously been involved in this for so long. How do we solve that problem, and how long is it going to take us to actually reintroduce a canopy in the parts of the city that are struggling with that?
Building up voices for folks who want to have these spaces and want the support for these spaces, and supporting those organizations just as much as supporting an organization like Captial Trees, is going to be how we can kind of create more equity within the tree canopy, and within our neighborhoods. It's easy to look at neighborhoods that when you have trees and not realize how valuable they are. But the solution isn't necessarily to go in and fix it yourself, right? The solution is to create space and make opportunities for other voices to be heard, in order to really create a more equitable landscape within our greening world.
Well, that's a great response, and I think that as somebody who fashions himself a problem solver, I jump to solutions a lot without thinking about some of those people that need to be involved in the discussion, the coalitions that need to be built to make sure that things can happen. So I appreciate that response. So a couple things before we run out of time. I want to make sure I give you the opportunity. If you have somebody in mind that we should interview for the future, I'd love to take a recommendation from you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think I would be remiss if you haven't talked to Capitol Trail not to mention them, given that our current gardens are so prevalent along that space, and we couldn't have that space without Capitol Trail. In the greening world, I would recommend Southside Relief if you have not spoken with them as well. They're doing a lot of wonderful greening, specifically in the South Side. And then totally separately, just kind of something that I think is really exciting is RVA Community Fridges does a wonderful job as well of trying to get food resources out to the community. So those would be, I guess, my top 3 for now. Well, there's so many groups.
Yeah, well, Taylor has to come on the show now because I've been asking her for months. And I know she's busy. I mean, she's busier than I am. But I saw her the other day, and I know they're doing great work. So I definitely want to get her in here. So before we run out of time, can you share with folks how they can find you and where they can go to provide support to Capitol Trees?
So you can check out our website at capitaltrees.org. You can also check out our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. And if you want to come volunteer with us, we're often in the gardens on Wednesday mornings. So drop me an email if you want to come participate. Let me know. You can find our volunteer opportunities on what is it? Community Engage now. It was hands-on. Now it's CF Engage, I think, is the new website for that. So our volunteering opportunities are listed there. You can, donate through our website, contact us directly. We love to take people on walks and have folks engage in the gardens. Or if you have questions, just reach out and let us get in touch.
Well, it's giving season, so
yes, happy Giving Tuesday.
Definitely a great organization to support, and something that you'll see a benefit from as we go into the future. So thank you for joining me. I've really enjoyed this interview.
Yeah, it's been great being on here. Thank you so much for having us come by.
My pleasure. My pleasure. This has been America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. Please join us on this 10-year community partnership to make RVA the healthiest in America by 2033. Check out americashealthiestcity.com and join us each Thursday here on the station at 6 a.m.